I'm delighted to welcome you to the Foreign Policy Association's annual David Coulter Distinguished Lecture on International Trade. I'm very pleased that this lecture is co-sponsored by the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College, and that our series with the Zicklin School of Business will include Tim Geithner, former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury and current president of Warburg Pincus, on October 22nd, right here at the Zicklin School. Our speaker this evening is the European Union Antitrust Chief. Her formal title is Commissioner for Competition of the European Commission, a position she assumed in 2014 with a 5-year term. Mrs. Margrethe Vestager was the former Danish Minister for Economic Affairs and the Interior, as well as a former Deputy Prime Minister of Denmark. She has also held the position of Minister for Education, as well as Minister for Ecclesiastical Affairs. I didn't have a chance to ask her what that involved. She was head of Secretariat with the Agency for Financial Management and Administrative Affairs. This is clearly an individual with a wide breadth of experience. Her actions against various companies, including Google, have made the front pages of newspapers around the world, including the business section of the New York Times. So I am delighted to turn the floor over to Mrs. Margrethe Vestager. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for this very warm welcome, and good evening. It was a pleasure to receive the very kind invitation to come and talk to you and to speak about European competition policy. It's also the European Union that has been on the front pages for the last weeks and months, and I'm afraid not all the coverage has been equally flattering. First, Europe made the front pages because of the very long Greek crisis linked to the euro crisis that erupted a couple of years ago. After rounds of negotiations this summer and the very recent Greek election, things look much more stable, much more promising than earlier this year. We have also seen and continue to see hundreds of thousands of refugees seeking shelter from war-torn areas. And in Europe, we have taken concrete steps to respond to this unfolding humanitarian crisis, to be able to help people, to be able to give them the humanitarian protection in their desperate situation. I think that Europe's response to these crises are watched closely over the Atlantic and around the world, and for very good reasons. Global financial markets, well, they want a stable and healthy euro. As to the refugee crisis, the White House decision to accept more refugees over the next 2 years shows that it's a challenge of historic and global dimensions, not only for Europe and neighboring countries, but for all of us. And I believe that these responses will also have profound implications for the future of Europe. But beyond the news and the headlines of the papers, there's also a lot of work being done in the machine room. A European Union that works, takes decision, a European Union that actually delivers. And this is important both for Europe, but also for the rest of the world. Because a strong Europe, a well-functioning Europe, is also a factor of stability in today's world. But, I guess you share this with me, a working machine room generally doesn't make it to the headlines. So today I would like to talk about the part that I play in this work, competition policy. I have been working with enforcement of antitrust law in the EU for almost a year now. This is a very short time. And yet some questions keeps coming back. I'm very often asked about the values underpinning competition policy. More specifically, people very often ask about the role of politics. And I think that there are a number of ways to look at politics of competition law enforcement. And here I'll give you 3 angles. Starting from whether competition policy is based on political values and principles. And the answer to that question, obviously, is yes. Keeping markets fair, level, open, is good for our economy and it's good for our societies. And it's not a natural state. It establishes a good environment for businesses in Europe, where companies will create wealth, but they will also create jobs, and they will invest in the future. Second question, or second angle, does competition enforcement relate to wider political priorities? And does it inform regulatory and other action taken to implement those priorities? And also here, the answer is yes. The Juncker Commission is a political commission, and the College of Commissioners plays as a team. Competition policy and myself as a competition commissioner clearly have our own space in it. But there should be no doubts that I will do my part to help achieve the Commission's broader objectives. The final question, the third angle, is competition law enforcement in individual cases politicized? And here the answer is a resounding no. We enforce the law and we serve a common interest. We are committed to the principles of fairness, good administration, transparency, due process. There is simply no room to spare for political interference. And I would like to share my position on these points. Antitrust law is an American invention from the late 19th century. And when our founding fathers laid the foundation for a united Europe, they saw the need to protect consumers and honest business from anti-competitive behavior from rivals. So we imported antitrust law, but we gave it a European angle. Since one of the pillars of the Union would be a European free trade area, what we nowadays call the single market, enforcement of EU competition law across the European internal market was given to a central authority, to the Commission. Devolving competition control to an EU-wide authority, sometimes exclusively, as we do it in analyzing large mergers, ensure that the European Union can talk with a single voice to large multinationals and to work with other jurisdictions. This facilitates the enforcement in the European Union and effective cooperation across borders between EU and its main partners, and the main partner, obviously, is the United States. Antitrust law was also extended to include the control of government subsidies. Governments were major economic actors in post-war Europe. they had, of course, the potential to undermine the internal market as much as any private company, because of subsidies, because of grant, because of special benefits. And this is why it is also for the EU competition enforcers to make sure that government support does not tilt the playing field. We call it state aid control. So, competition policy is very much at the core of European integration. Our work on the treaty, it hasn't changed since 1958. The founding fathers of Europe understood that there would be no genuine integration without a single market, and no functioning single market without a central competition authority. And then, fast forward, 6 decades later, here we are. The single market has been and will be a powerful engine of European integration, both in the economic sphere, but also beyond that. It's a job creator. It works for the European citizen. And this, of course, will continue in the future, and we will do our best to boost that. Of course, our first goal is preserving good competition conditions in the market, which translates into lower prices, higher quality, better quality, and wider choice for consumers. And therefore, every time the Commission takes a competition decision, we defend the interests of citizens in the European Union. So, as I see it, we bring the Union closer to people in a very, very tangible way. When we bust a cartel, say, or make sure that a merger between two companies does not turn them into a monopoly, we also show to European citizens that the European Union is on their side. We bring the Union closer to the people. Take our latest cartel decision. Last June, we fined a group of manufacturers and distributors of the trays used for packaging food in shops and supermarkets. You know them because probably you have them in your hand every day. These companies had colluded to keep prices artificially high, and they have done this for years. So dismantling this cartel was like repealing a hidden tax for the unsuspecting consumer. They were made to pay. They didn't know, but now they don't have to pay anymore. So when it comes to competition policy, keeping markets fair, level, and open is good for our economies and societies, and first and foremost, of course, important to the people. And the same goes, obviously, for law-abiding entrepreneurs. And the immediate effect of our decisions, well, obviously, it should be that everyone plays by the rules. At the same time, the way that we implement competition law and our decisions affirm that the European Union is built on the rule of law. In Europe, might is not right. When entrepreneurs see that a rival breaks the law, it's important that they can turn to competition agencies in Europe to have their rights and legitimate interests protected. Success in our internal market should depend only on the ability to attract consumers, to be innovative, to bring new, efficient products to the market, to see if that is what consumers want. And keeping the internal market open is also empowering. Doing business conditions improve as competition culture spreads. Europe becomes a better place to do business and to invest. And we want Europe to attract investment from abroad. Take the acquisition of the energy-related part of the French company Alstom by General Electric. There was concern about this deal on both sides of the Atlantics, but the company offered good remedies and we cleared the takeover. The deal was cleared by the European Commission and the Department of Justice in the US on the same day. I think that is sort of a very tangible evidence of the very, very close cooperation between the two jurisdictions. And I think that Europe becomes much more attractive as a place to invest, as a place to do business, when the application of competition rules is objective, consistent, even-handed. And of course, I'm determined to keep it that way. Competition enforcement is also, as I mentioned earlier, related to wider political priorities. For instance, the agenda to create growth and jobs. When President Juncker introduced the new commission, he underlined that he wanted it to be a political commission. For competition policy, this means using its tool to support our collective effort to boost the economy. And this is policy. It's not politics. Well, I can't even say the word, so just leave it. But of course, there are very clear limits. Enforcing competition rules follows strict procedures. And obviously, especially when it comes to the right of defense. Because every company that's involved have an obvious right to defend themselves. And we make sure that these limits are not trespassed. But competition policy can help us reach the objectives of the European Commission. Take, for example, the strategy policy package that we launched over the last few months in order to make a true digital single market, and the plans that we have to create an energy union. To sustain these policy drivers, the Competition Department had launched fast fact-finding exercises both in the e-commerce sectors and on the subsidies that some EU governments grant for energy generation. And these fact-finding exercises, we call them sector inquiries, they give us a clear but also an updated picture of what actually goes on. What is the state of competition in these markets? Later on, we can use the results to our enforcement priorities and to fine-tune our policies. And this is important in itself because public policy only works when based on facts. You take better decisions when they are informed decisions. Finally, a few pending investigations are contributing to the fight against tax evasion, another priority of our Commission. And what we are doing is that we are looking into some of the deals that multinationals have struck with national tax authorities in the EU in order to reduce the taxes they have to pay on profits, or to, well, eliminate them, if not altogether, then almost altogether. This is a very hard issue, both here and in the European Union. And we follow the debate on corporate taxation with, of course, great interest. And I think this is just another example as to how a strong and united Europe can join forces with our global partners and pursue global interest. We do our casework, impartial and fact-based. But of course, it will inform people about the things that we will not accept. We will not accept fiscal aid since we are also in the business of state aid control. So, ladies and gentlemen, so far we have seen antitrust enforcement is a political endeavor in the European Union in two respects. It plays a role in the process of European integration, and it helps the European Commission to reach its overall goals. But it is only part of the picture, because in one respect, antitrust enforcement and policy are like oil and water. They do not mix. Decision-making in individual competition cases cannot be bent to political priorities. European Union is based on the rule of law, and competition policy is implemented within our Union of Law. And when we look at individual cases, and the Commission takes decision on them, well, competition enforcement follows its own principles and rules, as if they were cast in stone. It must be impartial. It must be blind to the nationality of the companies we investigate, and it must be impeccable. If only because practically every decision we take must pass the muster of the European Court. Our decisions are object to very, very close scrutiny, internally, first, of course, and by the Union courts, on the facts, on the process, on the law. And those affected of our decision has very important procedural rights, not least extensive rights of defense. And this is important because it, of course, also enables and ensures that our decisions are thorough. Our investigations and decisions are based exclusively on legal and economic analysis, on the jurisprudence of the court, on the fact of the case, the relevant facts of the case. And of course, I talk to a lot of people. I listen to a lot of people, because what we do, the work we do, is not a work that we do in a vacuum. But not all the wishes and all the views of commentators, politicians, business representatives are relevant to our assessment and to the decisions of the Commission. They must have a foundation in facts and in law. And this means that impartiality is non-negotiable, because we know that our legitimacy and our credibility and ultimately, of course, our actions depend on it. As I said, the nationality of a company is a non-relevant fact. Nonetheless, some claims that when our casework involved giants like Apple or Google is an evidence of bias. But this is a fallacy. Of course, and that is obvious, US companies are often involved when we investigate the digital industry. But you will see many Japanese companies or firms involved in our car cartel cases. And because we are the EU competition authority, chances are that European companies are involved more than others across the board. Between 2010 and 2015, we adopted 34 cartel decisions involving 208 companies and imposing fine for 9.2 billion euros. Of these, around 5.4 billion, that's about 2/3 of the total, went to European companies. In contrast, 500 million went to 12 US-based companies. And this applies across our instruments. Statistics on merger interventions also confirms that there is no geographical bias. And these are the facts. I hope that, of course, no one will construe them to accuse of being anti-European, because there is no bias. It is just a result of fair-handed application of the law. In the past year, I've been struck by the solidity and the strength of the working relationship with between the European Commission and US antitrust agencies. And the importance of this transatlantic cooperation cannot be questioned. Well, of course it can be questioned, but the answer will be the same. We need this cooperation. But we also need to reach out more broadly. The markets have been globalized and businesses have been globalized now for a couple of decades. It is as important for law enforcement to keep pace. And what is important is, of course, that the importance of common values in regards to competition policy is growing. The importance of due process, of impartiality, of rigor of the facts, the law and the economics, that's growing. And it will only grow more in the years to come, because there is the willingness to create also a globalization of law enforcement. So competition policy is no longer a purely domestic preserve. And reaching its full potential requires recognition of the importance of international cooperation. And therefore, of course, I do hope that authorities, politicians, experts, scholars will come together to enable and to help us to keep pace with markets, to make sure that what we serve is the citizens. Because when we keep the markets open and the level field the playing field level, well, then everyone has a fair fighting chance. And that's basically what it's about. Then, of course, it becomes very, very complicated, because then comes into the stage lawyers. But even lawyers can't divert your attention from the very basics, that in enforcing competition law, we serve the citizens. Thank you very much for listening. Yes, I would be happy to do a Q&A if there is anyone who wants to ask a question. I think you should need the phone and just introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Andrea Sestanovich. I'm from JDX Consulting. Thank you so much for participating in this speaker series. So my question is in regard to the case against Gazprom. According to the Third Energy Directive, if I understand correctly, it calls for an unbundling of vertically integrated companies. So how would this affect Gazprom? Would the company be forced to sell off its pipelines that it owns within Europe, or how would this unfold, and what hurdles do you foresee?
Well, no, the third energy package will not have this direct result when it comes to Gazprom. You know, of course, that we have also a competition law case with Gazprom. We sent them the statement of objection last spring, and we just received their formal answer to the statement of objection. Parallel to that, Gazprom has sent us the first draft of what they think can be commitments to balance our concerns. And we'll see what that brings us, because it's still open. We're still analyzing what they have put on the table. When it comes to the third energy package, it is extremely relevant, but first and foremost for European member states. And now we're doing our best to make sure that it is actually implemented. Because in the strategy for the energy union, we built on the third energy package. And in order not to build on sand, well, then we want to make sure that it is fully implemented with the unbundling that you're referring to. So we do a lot of work on that, but on the unbundling team, it's only indirectly influencing foreign companies. There's another question up there.
My name is Adrienne Baker-Sapola. I have the good fortune to be retired and have a lot of time to come and hear wonderful presentations like your own. I was wondering if the Commission had anything to do with adjudicating the LIBOR rate fixing scandal that a lot of European banks had been involved with.
On the LIBOR rate, it was before I took office, so I don't have the details present. But a lot of work has gone into, in general, to both when it comes to match fixing, if you can call it that, but also in general to make European banking somewhat more boring in the future. I'm afraid that the effect of the pretty heavy set of rules for European banking will have the effect that it is not only more solid, but as I said, also quite more boring. So probably we won't have that kind of cases in the future. There's another one up there.
Hi, my name is Jürgen Schwering. I work for AXA. I'm from Germany. As a commissioner, you're involved in creating the rules for the common market. You gave the example of energy policy. As a commissioner, you're also involved in enforcing these rules to make sure that they are adhered to. Wouldn't it make more sense to have an independent competition authority that then enforces the rules? Because you're a little bit conflicted in that situation, aren't you?
Well, if there was the wrong outcome of any kind of conflicting thoughts, I am absolutely certain that the European courts would come down on that pretty hard, and that everything on the shelf with heavy things would fall down upon me. Because this is exactly the tricky point, and that's why I'm putting a lot of effort into saying that there is a very clear distinction between law enforcement and contributing in general to wider Commission priorities. And so far, I think it is successful. And we also have the court's word for the setup being in order also when it comes to human rights, that the right to defense, that the separation of the different instances, that is all right with our way of organizing things. But I'm very much aware of exactly the challenge that you're putting, because you need to have an impartial law enforcement, and you need to make sure that whatever you do can stand up in court. And therefore, I am extremely independent from my colleagues in that part of the work. Down here.
Good evening, Commissioner. Thank you for your presentation this evening. My name is Luther Lowe. Do you think that you mentioned some of this misperception that there's, if Apple or Google is investigated, that is somehow anti-US. Do you think that the recent reports last Friday that the Federal Trade Commission is opening its own Android investigation may help alleviate some of that misperception?
Well, that is always hard to guess about that, but just the fact that we have quite a number of US-based companies as complainants in the Google case should make the concern go away anyway. in my experience in general, sometimes a position can be convenient for other reasons than just the obvious. So I will do no guesswork about what will be the position later on. Actually, I found, because I was in the US almost on the day when we presented the statement of objection, that there was a sort of a very balanced way of thinking about this. That, yes, these are very successful, big US companies, but if there is any wrongdoing, well, then you should look at it. And if you can prove it, you should come down on it. And that was, for me, a very positive experience, that in the approach, there was no bias. It was very pragmatic and very open. I very much appreciated that. There's a question right here.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. My name is Chantal Moses, and my question for you is, what do you think is the role of digital in the future of competition? Is it friend, or do you consider it foe?
Well, I think that the digital era is changing our societies, and the tech business is changing the way that we do almost everything. The way we communicate, the way we travel, the way we shop, the way we see ourselves, the way we build up our identity. And if you have this privilege, well, then you should also expect to be questioned, because they change our societies, and they are successful in doing that. But I think that these questions has been legitimate for every industry over the last centuries when they have changed our societies. There are famous quotes about cars when they were first introduced in Denmark, where I come from, as something very, very wild and unwanted. And yet here we are. So in that, I think neither friend nor foe, but new conditions. And when I'm asked, well, do you need new tools because this is all fast moving? Well, sometimes I get this feeling that what we're looking at, well, it goes back to Adam and Eve, because it is basically still about greed and fear and doing it better than you could do otherwise if you were doing it under merit. And then, of course, the way we investigate has to keep up, because also the bad guys are digitalized these days. They keep their records in the cloud, and they use prepaid cards, etc., etc. But what we are dealing with is very fundamental. In front of you, here.
Thank you very much for your wonderful speech. I'm Prakash Sethi on the faculty at the Zicklin School. I have a somewhat different question. UK just passed a law against import of goods that are made under sweatshop conditions abroad. Nothing like that is currently enforced in the rest of Europe, especially Germany. Do you feel that this would be part of your sphere of influence to see that similar conditions are created in the rest of Europe? It does change competition dynamics.
I don't know the answer to that question. And I think maybe there are different ways to enable better working conditions. It is already so just within the European Union that you'd find that in some countries, unions has been very effective in their workings with employers, so they have good working conditions and safe working conditions. In other member countries, they have lower salaries, maybe not so particular on working conditions. So already there, you'd find that in the respect of the labor market, you may not find a completely level playing field. I think this has to change over time, but I don't have a precise answer to your question, unfortunately, because I think everyone shares the ambition for working environments to improve more and more over time, especially in some of those countries where the working conditions are, to say it mildly, very, very challenging for people. I think we can have just a couple of questions more down here in front.
Yeah, Laila Knecho from the faculty of the Zicklin Business School. You emphasized the need for global cooperation on antitrust issues, which I'm sure we have no arguments about that. But how likely are they actually to take place, given that you stressed that antitrust regulations originate in political values and in political priorities? And I think I would extend that and say that they also have very deeper roots to them in different views in societies of how much competition we want to have and how we balance the trade-off between level of competition and what we give up in order to reach that. And we are seeing now several conflicts on this ground, particularly between American companies in Europe. Just recently, Google has been subject for that. And I know, not under your watch, but there have been a lot of issues with Microsoft previously and many others. How likely is this to be harmonized, and whom do you see undertaking this?
Well, I think it's very important to do it step by step. Rather a quick step than a slow fox, but one of the things that I appreciate is sort of a very practical approach. Last year, the International Competition Network decided on a practical guide as to how to organize casework. And I think that's a very sort of hands-on ways of doing things. Instead of working on a level of declarations and abstractions, then be concrete and work together. Grab the phone. Just lately, last week, we had an international merger workshop hosted by the Commission in Brussels. There were 250 participants, 50 jurisdictions were represented. To discuss how to do merger cases. And that is also giving people a network. A lot of phone numbers and email addresses are being exchanged in order to, if you have the right waivers, in order to cooperate very closely. So I think basically the day-to-day cooperation will sort of pave the way for a more and more coherent approach. And of course, I think some of the values of due process and the right to defend yourself, well, if you get started there, well, then there may still be differences. But for a global company, it is important to meet more or less the same standard and the same requirements in the jurisdictions where they, for instance, would have to notify a merger. There's another question right up there.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I just recently retired from full-time corporate work, so I'm enjoying the benefit there, and I also am having a blast here as an adjunct business professor at Baruch. So here's my question to you, and I want to go a little broader here. Can you comment with respect to your counterpart agencies and commissions, more from a global sense? How does Europe, sounds like Europe and the US, there's some good coordination there. But if you can kind of broaden that out, comment with respect to, say, the Far East, China, India, Japan. And I'm not picking on any one country here, but just in a broad sense of Europe seems to have some rigor to it, some objectivity. Now, can you comment about other countries and, where they are and where would you like them to be?
Well, we do not do kind of a ranking of partners. But what we do is to appreciate when the cooperation on cases is well working. And we have very good cooperation. I think the merger of GE and Alstom, it was notified in more than 2 handful of jurisdictions. And we worked very closely with authorities in Brazil, South Korea, well, a number of different jurisdictions. And we try, also to push our cooperation to be more and more open. It takes a lot of agreement and to get sort of the due process right. But for instance, with some jurisdictions, we can coordinate a down rate so that we knock on the door at the same time, no matter the time zone. But then, of course, we would like to also afterwards to compare and discuss evidence. And that takes sort of second layer of agreements. And we try to do that where we can in order to be more effective. And I think that is the thing to do. I had colleagues coming over from Japan just the week before this week. I had colleagues from South Korea before the summer. I'm going to China myself this month in order, to weave a pattern of cooperation to supplement the very close cooperation by case teams where they pick up the phone or send an email if they have the right waivers. Another question up there, and then we take the last one down here.
Hi, I'm David. I work at a consultancy in New York. My question concerns trade deals. So in the past, most trade deals have focused on lowering tariffs, and currently most trade deals have focused on labor rights, environmental protection, intellectual property. So going forward, what type of factors do you think are important in future trade deals?
Well, we have made the trade negotiation with the US a very, very high priority because we think of that as a very, very modern way to do a trade agreement. Basically because it's very much about standards and setting standards and solving conflicts and enabling more than it is concretely on tariffs here and there. And I think that is very important. We have laid on the table a new way of solving investors' disputes. It has been highly debated in a European context, and we thought that we should invent a new way of doing that with two major economies as the US and the EU economy. And that, I think, when it comes to trade, to let it be around standards, is very important. The competition chapter is rather general, it's good, but I think the main thing is who's going to set the standards of the future when it comes to a number of different things, as you mentioned yourself, environment being one of them.
Yeah, my name is Yvonne Bendinger-Rothschild. I'm with the European American Chamber of Commerce. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to pick up on that question, how far competition is reaching into the TTIP negotiations. And more specifically, because you mentioned standards, I mean, it's kind of regulatory acknowledgement on both sides. Mm-hmm. Is it something that happens on that level, or is it a discussion that is taking place elsewhere?
Well, the competition chapter is relatively general in its approach. I don't think that the TTIP as such will change much. It will enforce some good patterns that we know already. What I think can be the real strengths of TTIP is the forward working with standards. For instance, very actual, if you have the same standards or recognize each other's standards when it comes to car safety, well, then maybe you can sort of be more lean in the way you do inspections to the benefit both of authorities and businesses. And I think in that we can find that actually in a number of areas we can have the cake and eat it because we can have strong standards, but we can also have more lean procedures with businesses. And I think that could be a great benefit. It's my colleague Cecilia Malmström who's in charge of the negotiations, and I think she's doing a tremendous job. But we very often discuss this in the entire Commission because it is high priority, not only because that trade has always been a way to develop economies, but also because that we think that it should be in the relationship between the US and the EU that new standards are set, also for the global markets. And I think this is a way to do it.
Commissioner Vestager, on behalf of the Foreign Policy Association and the Zicklin School, thank you very much.